the US goes to polls on November 5th. The country will choose its next president. It will either be Kamala Harris from the Democratic Party or Donald Trump from the Republican Party. While there are other third-party candidates, the real race is between these two. So, who will vote for Harris? And who will try and bring Trump back to power?
Right.
One way to look at potential voters is through the lens of race. The US is home to more than 333 million people. This is according to the last census, taken in 2022. Now, let's break up that figure by race. About 58.9% of the US population identifies as white. About 19.1% are Hispanic. Black people make up 12.6% of the US population. Then, you have people of Asian descent who make up 6.1%. 2.4% of America is multiracial. 0.7% are Native American people. And Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders make up 0.2% of the population. That's the demographic breakup of the US population according to the 2022 census. Let's look at the 4 biggest demographic groups, the ones most likely to influence the 2024 election. You have white people, Hispanic people, Black people, and people of Asian descent. In the last few US elections, these 4 groups have made up 96 to 98% of the US electorate. Look at this chart to see the composition of voters. You'll notice that it doesn't correspond to the population breakup. Even though white Americans make up less than 60% of the population, about 74% of the people who vote are white. This means white people have a disproportionately high say in the election compared to their population. Black voters come close to representing their share of the US population, but Hispanic people and people of Asian descent do not have a proportional say. They have historically been underrepresented at the ballot box. So, while the 4 major racial groups do decide US elections, white people have the biggest say by far. So, how do the different American racial groups usually vote? We'll look at the last 4 elections for clues. These are the 2016 presidential election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, then the 2018 midterms, the 2020 presidential election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and then the 2022 midterms. Here's the voter breakup by race for these elections. The most obvious difference is the percentage of white voters. White voters have made up about 62% of the Democratic Party's voter base. This is across the last 4 elections. In contrast, white people made up about 87% of the Republican Party's voter base. They are the driving force behind the Republicans. And it seems more white people vote for the GOP than for the Democrats. This has consistently been the case. Let's zoom in on the last election. In the 2022 midterms, 57% of all white voters choose the Republican Party. 41% voted for the Democrats, and 2% cast their votes elsewhere. So Republicans have the edge when it comes to white voters. But that edge is blunted when the black vote comes into play. Let's look at the 2022 midterm statistics again. A whopping 93% of all black voters chose the Democrats. 93%. And remember, black people are relatively well represented at the ballot box. So we can say that most black Americans vote blue. This has been proven time and again. In the last 4 elections, black people on average made up more than 17% of the Democratic Party's voter base. 17% versus only 1% on average for the Republican Party. Now we look at Hispanic people. They make up almost 20% of the US population. But when it comes to voting, they only make up about 9% of the electorate. It shows that Hispanic people are very underrepresented at the polling booth. But this 9% is still significant. It can turn the tide of any election. So Hispanic people are definitely a key demographic in the US. Like black voters, Hispanic voters traditionally lean towards the Democrats. But the difference in party choice is far less pronounced. Between 2016 and 2022, Hispanic people made up about 12% of the Democratic voter base on average. For the Republicans, this number was about half. About 6% of Republican voters over the last few elections have been Hispanic people. It's a 2-to-1 ratio in favor of the Democrats. But these numbers aren't set in stone. You'll notice that over time, Hispanic support for the Democrats has stagnated, whereas it has gone up for the Republicans. The swing is still minor, but this year's election could solidify the migration. And it proves that America's Hispanic population still has a big say in elections, even if it isn't proportional to the community's size. Then we have the people of Asian descent, America's fastest growing demographic. They make up only 6.1% of the population right now, according to the 2022 census. But that's 27% higher than the proportion of Asian people in 2010. So the population of Asian people in the US grew by 27% between 2010 and 2022. That's much faster than any other demographic group. If this growth continues, people of Asian descent will continue to have a greater say in American politics as the years go by. Historically, this is another group that has leaned towards the Democrats, even more than Hispanic people. In 2022, 68% of all Asian Americans voted blue, compared to 60% of all Hispanic voters. So both the groups lean towards the Democratic Party, but Asian Americans slightly more so. People of Asian descent made up about 4% of the Democratic Party's voter base over the last 4 elections. That fell to about 2% for the Republicans. But again, there's a caveat here. In 2016 and 2018, barely any Asian Americans voted red. But in the 2020 presidential elections, Asian American support for the Republicans surged. They made up 3% of the Republican voter base. It was a historic high. With Trump contesting again, more Asian Americans might be tempted to vote red once more.
Thank you, everybody.
So that's how the biggest racial groups in the US usually vote. White people lean towards the Republicans. Black people overwhelmingly vote for the Democrats. Hispanic people and people of Asian descent have historically voted in favor of the Democrats as well. But the gap seems to be narrowing. And this should worry Kamala Harris and encourage Donald Trump.